You're listening to the Two Guys Talking Podcast Network. Check it out now at twoguystalking.com.
Many things are said during a podcast. In fact, you know what? You can read all about it. That's right. Transcription services. They're all the rage inside of podcasting, but I gotta tell you, they're not the most compelling use of time. I mean, like, have you ever actually read a transcript of your podcast? If you haven't, I got good news, but I got more bad news. And we're going to talk about all of it inside this episode of the Podcast Gauntlet. Greetings, everybody. I'm Mike Wilkerson, one of your hosts.
And I'm Brian Ensminger, the other one of your hosts.
Brian, it's time to throw down, discuss, rise, and shine in podcasting inside this episode. And today's focus is transcripts. I love the concept of transcripts, mostly because, you know, if you think to yourself, okay, well, I say reasonably valuable things inside of my podcasts. And so, I mean, it's got to be great that it's all written down in a great form for people to just sit and read, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you know, in fact, the value of search engine optimization, my God, it's got to be skyrocketing through the roof, correct?
I'm so glad you brought up the value of SEO, because I think we want to talk about that. And no, it's not.
Right. And this is where I want everybody to just hit the pause button, not on our podcast, but on your mind. And I want you to just take in the ideas and the concepts that Brian and I are going to talk about when it comes to transcripts tonight, because the fact of the matter is, again, as a data guy, I love to see reports of just about everything that culminates data and information, because one, it allows you to definitely hunt and search through things. If when I say the words throw down, it'd be cool if I can go through something that has compiled every word that Brian and I have ever said inside of an episode, and I can find it instantaneously. Man, giant checkbox on that. That's super. But when you actually read the transcript, especially those of you with little audio picadillos, like the things that are featured in the always famous you know reels that I send to my clients, those are the things that are also recorded inside of a transcript that are absolute landmines to sit and read.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. Like, I think there's value in transcripts. I think where we're headed with this is, yeah, transcripts are good for some things, but not good for some other things. As an example, I've just been stumbling over my words, so unless Mike edits that out, the transcript would have me saying a bunch of gibberish, followed by hopefully something that makes sense right about now. But even beyond that, even if the transcript has been cleaned up, we don't talk like we read. And so, like, when we process audibly, when we process audio, we hear it differently than if we were to read the same thing. Our brains just process it differently. I don't know why. I'm not a scientist. I just know that's true. And so when there have been times where I've been really interested. I want to go find a transcript and just kind of scan through it, because I don't have time to listen to somebody blab on for an hour about something when I really only want a couple of minutes. My experience has been, if I actually have to read the whole thing, I'd rather not. I'll just leave it at that. I don't know, Mike.
Well, hey, how about inside of the actual presentation of a podcast episode? When I think about the show notes for the entries that I make for, say, the Podcast Gauntlet, if you go check out our website right now, if you go to podcastgauntlet.com, the first thing that comes up is our front presentation page that has the 101 episode link on it, and then links to the library, and then links to every way that you can subscribe, like, communicate with us. All that's on the front page of that. But inside of the library entries is each of the libraries. And so does that mean that transcript that is, I don't even know how many pages it would be or how many paragraphs it would be. In fact, you know what? It would be 0 paragraphs, because that's how transcripts work. It's line item, text, line item, text, line item, text, and nothing else. It doesn't format it, at least to my knowledge. So are you ready to read that? Are you ready to read all of the you knows? Are you, when you have I'm doing this intentionally because can you imagine me what I just said being in a transcript and you trying to stumble over it as you read it?
I mean,
that's what I'm talking about
right now.
Yeah, right, right.
Yeah.
It is. It is in addition to it being an audio landmine, which is why we have editors, it's also just a text landmine set that is
Yeah.
just waiting for your eyeballs to explode, because that's what's going to happen when you try to read this.
Yeah. So, I mean, to your point, there are some things that I think transcripts are good at. One is availability of search. Not getting onto search engine optimization. I'm not talking about that. That's, I think, a separate topic. But if you have a set of episodes and you want to search for where words showed up, if there's a particular topic, that's an easy way to do it, especially on a website, because it's got a search function. I think another one, like you talked about, either replacing show notes or adding them to the show notes. It's not really my preference. However, if somebody is unable to listen, having that there is probably the next best thing. So I'm like, okay, I can do that. I think the real value of a transcription is if it can be turned into a time-stamped caption set. So there's some of the stuff in the Podcasting 2.0 ecosystem that allows for transcriptions to be turned into captions. And that, I think, is great and can be implemented really well so that the person on the end who's listening can see your transcript. So if they can't listen, or if they're in an environment that's loud and they're missing words, they've got that there. I think that's an incredibly wise use of a transcript, however you do it, just as long as you format it correctly. But I don't know, do you want to talk about the SEO part of it? Because I know that's one of the things I've seen is you need to publish the transcript for SEO.
Yeah, well, really, I want to go back even further than that. I want to talk about something that I did. Yeah, it was something that I did and commissioned inside of 2008 and 9 was something called the Transcripted Podcast Series. The Transcripted Podcast Series is exactly what it sounds like. I paid people here in the US to transcribe podcasts, and it was hell for the people that did it. Yeah. Not only was it hell for them, it was hell for people to communicate back with me to ask questions about what was being said or how something should be represented in the case of when the instance would come up. Because really back then there weren't any rules. The automation side of transcription was not there. So that when you pick up a modern day smartphone now, you can essentially do whatever you want to, where you open up I'm just going to use Google as a sample, where I can hit the microphone. And if I've clicked appropriately, you can now see the words that I'm saying start to appear on the screen inside of a variety of either apps or inside of an email compilation message. They will actually just start to appear as Google hears them and tries to approximate them and then showcase them out. I know this because originally, for those that don't know, my wife is deaf. That's a lot of how she would interact with people before they came out with specific apps, where somebody would say, hello, I'm so glad that you could come. I'm so sorry that you're deaf. We're going to try to accommodate you as best we can. However, just know it's going to be a little slow going because of that. Now, that can all be showcased inside of sign language very easily in a whole lot shorter period of time. But if you're standing in front of my wife and you have no sign language skill set, how are you going to convey that exactly? Well, how we are able to do that, especially now, there are a series of apps that are made to do that, where rather than having to go into a specific app or whatever, there are now shortcuts and buttons available on the desktops or the front showpieces of your smartphones. And she hits the button and then she just looks at them and goes, for those of you that are listening, I'm doing the, okay, now talk motion sign that is kind of universal for those that are deaf that want people to just go ahead and speak. And so when those people speak, she can now just start reading the words. And as she starts seeing the words, she'll begin nodding like I am on the screen right now. And then the communication can at least start and or happen. And so she can either respond or she can write something down or whatever the method that they're going to try to communicate something is. And back in the mid-aughts, I was paid by one of my sponsors, Relay Missouri, which is a faction of Sprint, to make the transcripted podcast set of podcasts. And so I did. For a series of 7 months, everything that appeared on my podcast network, which at that time there were probably 12, 13, 14, probably 14, 15 live podcasts. Every single one of those shows for that period of time was a transcripted podcast. It cost me a fortune, but I'm really glad that Sprint / Relay Missouri was proud to pay for those things because I needed the money to do it. It was incredibly expensive, incredibly detailed, and unfortunately, it didn't track well. So for even the people I was making a transcripted podcast for, i.e. the deaf community or the deaf and hard of hearing community, It didn't sell. And so if it's not going to sell inside of the deaf and hard of hearing community, you know, the people that can't hear the podcast, why are we going to think that somehow out of thin air, it's going to work better for people that can hear and then read it? That was the first rub for me in regard to transcription. The second one was one that we've already talked about, which is, have any of you ever read your own transcripts?
Yes, it's bad.
Because if you haven't, it's hard. It's hard to read. As much as all of us, including me, on the front end of all of our Podcast Gauntlet episodes, I try to compile in my brain something of a cold open that is coherent so that I'm not stumbling through things. I'm trying to entertain you and get you engaged into the podcast episode within 20, 25 seconds or so-ish, asterisk. And I like doing that. But it's a skill set. What do you think, Brian?
I think that the use case that you're talking about, the deaf and hard of hearing, is probably the ideal use for a transcription. Obviously, it's going to be harder to read than if it was written in prose. I get that. But I think that's the ideal use. I think the thing that I kind of fall down on, and I think we've already kind of touched on this, but we see people saying, essentially, don't bother writing show notes, just publish the transcription. And we've already talked about how terrible it is to read. I've also heard and so like on that front, as a listener, I would rather have a 3-sentence paragraph and 3 bullet points, or even skip the bullet points, than to have to try and scroll through an hour of transcription in my podcast app using my finger. Like, that is literally not going to happen. It's just, if I see that it's a transcription, I'm done, right?
Yeah. And one of the best parts, and I'm really glad that we're able to ask an audience. The fact is that we've started latching onto a really good, solid niche audience. And I know that you guys will chime into clarion calls. And so here is one of the first clarion calls of this episode. Where are the great transcripts that we need to go read to understand the samples of the power of transcripts? Where are they? All you got to do is jump onto our website over at podcastgauntlet.com, fill out the quick web form, and tell us where to go to read these immaculate conception transcripts that are out there that will instantly showcase a variety of things. First, something that is not a text-written stumbling landmine block that we have to trudge through. I desperately want to see it. Second, something that showcases the power and validity of search engine optimization power inside of transcripts, because that's always in the argument. It's always in the myth that you must have transcripts available. It is always there. It usually leads the pack inside of the discussion.
Yeah, and I am of the opinion, unscientific and untested as it is, that a transcript is only marginally better than a paragraph and 2 bullet points. And the reason I say that, like, I get that when Google looks at a paragraph and 3 bullet points from a text perspective, it's probably not going to care that much, but they're indexing audio. So there's a little bit of transcription going on already. But on the flip side, if that is your written content, Google is in the business of indexing things that people want to read and refer to. And if what you're providing is a terrible reading experience, people won't do that. I'm not saying don't link to a transcript. I'm not saying don't have it so that people that want to quote you can't find the quote and just copy and paste. What I'm saying is, if you're using that as your show notes and the argument is SEO, I think it's a fool's errand. I think it's only the really, really, really long tail keywords that people aren't searching for where that might have any value. Because if there is one reasonably well written article in the 500 plus word range, it's probably going to rank better because it's going to be coherent. It's going to be topical. It's not going to meander all over the place like this podcast episode did, which is great. This is where we express our personality and the crazy that makes up me and Mike. You get to know us.
Yeah.
If you read the transcript, you'll probably want to come and meet us with a gun and shoot us and never do that again.
Totally true. And then the third thing we're kind of alluded to that, but I'm telling you, I want someone to stop what you're doing. Go and hunt out the information and drop a link to wherever it lives on Mr. Internet anywhere. Is the study somewhere in the span of podcast verse? Somebody has done at least one study that will show me, hey, Mike, you and Brian and that podcast glovey microphone thing, you're an idiot because, here, let me show you. And then we're going to read this new report / ideal of instant karma where somebody shows us, you see, transcripts are the third coming of podcastdom. Oh, that's all I want. I want one of those three things to happen. And I know that you guys can pull it off because you are the Podcast Gauntlet audience. So throw down, access our website over at podcastgauntlet.com. Fill out the quick web form and tell Brian and I where all of these samples live, but most importantly, what you think about transcripts inside of the podcast verse. Until next time, I'm Mike Wilkerson, one of your hosts.
And I'm Brian Ensminger, the other meandering host you have tonight.
Thanks for throwing down, discussing, rising, and shining in podcast. See you for the next episode. Bye.